Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 124 of D&D Discussions, the podcast for players and DMs alike, where we cover a wide variety of topics to help you with your games. I'm your host, Ryan Reeder, and with me, as always, is my good buddy, Ben Bumhofer. How you doing tonight, Ben?
I am back from vacation and slightly sick, but doing great.
So say we all.
Yes. It was much needed, and being around thousands of people, you're bound to pick up something. But luckily, I got all my vaccines because vaccines work. And
That's right.
So the sore throat's passed, and I'm just kind of stuffy for the most part. So maybe I'll have some tea before bed, and then I'll be good.
Yeah, that sounds good. You know what'd be even better, though? If we were joined tonight by someone else to talk to.
I think
And it
you're
turns
right.
out that we are,
What?
actually. We have the wonderful Alyssa Visscher joining us for the second time tonight to talk about a lot of really fun D&D stuff. Alyssa, thank you so much for joining us again this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a fun time to talk to you guys. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's always a blast with you, and I'm so glad that you're able to join us because, I mean, we've been chomping at the bit to get our hands on the new DMG, and we got it, and we've been pouring through it, and it's so full of just content that, I mean, we can only bounce back and forth so much about, I like this, let's do that, this is great and stuff. So having someone here who, contributed to it is just mind-blowingly cool for us. So thank you so much for joining us.
I was saying to you guys before that I'm still like mind blown about the fact that my name is on the credits list here. So, mind blowingly cool all around.
Yeah, when the article first came out, that was just like, there was some people consulting, and I was reading through, it's like, oh, Matthew Mercer, oh, Deborah Ann Wall, oh, Alyssa Visscher. What?
It's me. I know. It's crazy.
And I think I DM'd you shortly after. I was just like, did you see this article? Like, oh my God, what a cool thing. Like, how did you keep this secret?
Very difficultly. It was not easy to keep that one under the wraps.
Yeah, that's really, really big. So first off, huge congratulations. That's that is like the top tier tabletop RPG thing to have your name in the credits for sure.
I have peaked. This is
you've reached the mountaintop.
Ultimate. That's it. This is the mountain.
You've plateaued. You're just stuck here now.
Yeah. And honestly, if I do nothing else, I will die happy.
So obviously you don't work for Wizards of the Coast directly. You did something called consulting, which is very, very common in the tabletop RPG industry. So before we jumped into the DMG, I just wanted to have you talk just a little bit about, like, what is consulting? What is it like to do consulting, and how does one get into a consulting position?
Yeah, consultants is really interesting because it's such a very broad thing, right? So even if you look at the credits list of consultants, there are some folks that were brought in very specifically for sensitivity and inclusion reads and that kind of consulting. And then you have some other of us who were brought in that were consultant, checkbox other, because we were each kind of focused on one particular niche area. So sensitivity and inclusion consultants are looking for, issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, religion issues, all of that kind of stuff to make sure that, those kind of issues are handled appropriately. And they have the very, very large expertise. So Jen Kretschmer is one of them. She has multiple degrees in areas, related to disability, for instance, right? And so folks like that, are reading through the things, and they are noting and annotating specific words or specific phrases or paragraphs or concepts, and then giving suggestions and feedback and talking about what you would do different. For myself, how did I get into this is hilarious because it's basically ranting on Twitter back in like 2020, 2021.
Back when Twitter
I
was useful.
Yeah, right. Way back then, I was hiding from my life by analyzing like aspects of like Dungeons and Dragons on Twitter. And I wrote several threads on the Dungeon Master's Guide, particularly the 2014 version, and how I think one of the threads started with the fact that every time I saw somebody on Reddit just be like, you should read the Dungeon Master's Guide. You have all the answers to this question. I wanted to slap them in the face with the book because, there's so many structural and content and, presentational issues with the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. And then I followed up those threads with taking a look at the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guides and what I love about them, because I felt like they were much stronger versions because they were written more specifically for new players and to draw like new dungeon masters in. And those threads gained traction, and I was eventually followed by a number of like designers and folks from Wizards of the Coast, including James Wyatt, who was one of the co-leads of this Dungeon Master's Guide. And so it was actually last October. I had just gotten back from last year's Big Bad convention in San Francisco. And like maybe a week later, I had this email from James Wyatt being like, hey, I don't want to say anything because it's not for surezies yet, but you might be getting an email. And so maybe think about how much you might be interested. Like just like a kind of like a feeling out the waters, and which was nice because that freaked me out quite enough that I went speechless and ran to my husband and was like, oh my gosh, look at this. What even is my life? Which was followed with like an actual official email with, cool. With the opportunity early November, mid-November, and then I started the consultation work in December. And so for my kind of consulting, it was really open-ended. It was basically like, we're going to hand you these chapters in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and we want you to read them for issues related to like how useful it is, especially for new dungeon masters, but also for experienced dungeon masters. How useful do you find it? Just knowing, like, they knew what my specialties or my areas of interest would be and the way that I analyze it. And so they were basically like, here's the chapters, do your thing. And then just give us a report, listing by page and by heading what your feedback is. And, there was no like word count minimum or anything like that, but just like however much feedback you had, please give it to us.
So it's kind of like a, not exactly editing, but like just, okay, add this in here. This needs to be reworded. This like kind of like you're grading a paper for a college course or something like that to really kind of get the point across, because, the DMG is for teaching essentially.
Yes. Yeah. And so that was really my focus going in, was looking at it. So I focused on chapters 1 and 2, which were like the basics and like running the game. And then 4 and 5, which were about adventures and the campaign. And some things have been shuffled around. There were some things that were in like one of my chapters that ended up in chapter 3, some things that were in the old chapter 3 that ended up in chapter 2, some reshuffling based on feedback they got, not only from me, but like from other consultants as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's this really interesting mix of like digging into the nitty gritty, but also a really high level, right? And so some of my feedback, it was very specific. Like, I don't think this wording works because of this. Here's an alternative wording. And so like a week ago, I was like, just like looking at the published version and comparing it to my notes, just because like I'm an arrogant little shit who wanted to see what I all did, basically. Just like eat my little popcorn and be like, what changed? And there'd be like a sentence or a paragraph that has a couple of sentences that are very specifically from the wording that I had. And then other bits of my feedback were just very like high level, like this, the way that one of the chapters was organized before was like really quite confusing. It didn't really have a logical flow, or it didn't really make sense. It wasn't really accessible for somebody who needed to figure out what the process was, because the pieces were organized in a way that didn't follow like a process. So it was a very interesting mix of like down into the nitty-gritty details and then very high level like overview.
That's actually something that I think is, very cool, because when, people are, writing their own supplements or, creating the game and everything like that, or their homebrew sessions, you don't really have that same, like, macro view, as well as like the small details sometimes. So being able to put the process in, and especially with the flow, like, kind of like when you build a pyramid, you need to have a strong base so that you can build on top of it. And I have to say that, like, some of my favorite chapters are like chapter 4 and 5, the creating adventures and creating campaigns, because one, it made me feel good because a lot of the stuff that it says in there, I'm like, hey, I'm doing some of that. Yay. So I'm
Yay!
like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So, but then, kind of being able to see like, oh, maybe I'll bring this in at this point, or, maybe kind of brainstorm around this idea. And, that'll give your players, an extra hook, or, more connection to the world, or something along those lines. So like, I really appreciate the fact that, I mean, definitely your contributions and everybody who worked on those chapters really looked at that as a good stepping stone to get to that higher end, like, mindset of everything. And I mean, like I said, fantastic work on those. I mean, I think I called them out in our last episode as like some of my favorite stuff in the book, because it is just like one of the best tools that we've gotten for 5th edition for anybody who wants to do any sort of homebrew.
I think that they're really strong now, which is really exciting, because chapter 5, the one with creating campaigns, was the weakest, in my opinion. The original draft was one of the weakest ones. And now I look through that and I'm like, oh, this is my favorite. Like, there's so much really good stuff in here. And it's really interesting because when you really step back and you design something for like a new person, you have to go back and you have to really think out, what are all the tiny little steps that we do when we're experienced and we know what to do? What are those tiny little steps that we do without thinking? And that ends up being good, not only obviously for new folks and like neurodivergent folks who end up like, who have struggles with executive, functioning and have a hard time with, processes, but it ends up being really, really beneficial for us, like, more experienced game masters, because like, one of the things that always makes your games better is going back to the basics and going, what kind of bad habits have I gotten, or what kinds of things have I just kind of like let slip because I've kind of, gotten into a habit. I've forgotten about, hazards or traps, or maybe I've forgotten about, thinking about my campaign conflicts, or, character arcs and backstories. When we break them down into little pieces, it benefits everybody. And so I think one of my biggest things that I love about this DMG is that it's so useful for new DMs, but I think that like experienced DMs will also, like, there's so much good stuff in this also for experienced DMs. They didn't forget about experienced DMs.
Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful. It's definitely a massive step up from the 2014 DMG. And just having gone through it and looking at it, because I know you talked a lot about really liking the 4th edition DMG.
Yeah.
How would you say this new one compares to what was probably your favorite, or more what you felt was way more useful than the original 5th edition one?
Yeah, the 4th edition DMG was my favorite. I did multiple, Twitter rants / threads about it, because, the game was designed, however you feel about 4th edition, the thought process was to be able to capture and attract a new group of people. Mm-hmm. And so the Dungeon Master's Guide was written for a new group of people, whereas the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, they're really looking at more recapturing folks from like, the second edition who maybe didn't stick with third edition, or, folks from 3.5 who skipped fourth edition. They were looking at recapturing these older older players, or players playing older editions. And so the 2014 one ended up really focusing more on experienced folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the fourth edition DMG was just like chef's kiss, just my favorite. And I'm still working my way through this new Dungeon Master's Guide because she is a chunky girl,
It's very
like,
big.
So much so.
she's thick, and there's so much in here. But I do think that this is better than the fourth edition DMG, and that is some high praise. There's a few things in the fourth edition DMG that I'm sad didn't make it into this DMG, but on the balance, there's a lot more even new stuff or additional stuff in this DMG that the fourth edition one didn't have. So
I think for me, just as a more experienced game master, chapter 3 has been one of the most interesting. Just because it really compiled just all these like niche things or side things or stuff you're not going to use every single time, but it's very handy to know. And like I find that like chapter 3, chapter 5 have been probably the things I've been drawing the most inspiration and oh yeah, that's cool, or oh, I didn't think about that type things from.
Yeah, I got to so they did send me chapter 3 and chapter 6, which is the cosmology chapter, and then like the lore glossary. They did send me that so that I had so that I could have context and I knew what else was in there. So I wasn't like, you guys, there's no hazards, or where's the traps? Right. So that I knew what else was like in the book. And like when I opened like even the draft version of chapter 3, I was like, look, it's all in one spot. Because like,
yeah, that's the big
2014 DMG, it's like somebody took these like good pieces of confetti and just like threw them throughout the whole book, and you have to go on this like world's worst treasure hunt to try to find all the things. And they put it all in one chapter, and which is even better is like there's so many cross references within the book, so that you don't have to wonder, oh shoot, is there more on NPCs somewhere else? Is there, where else is there social encounters or whatever? They put a lot of those things in there, which was like one of the things that I was looking for. They had quite a lot in the original draft, and I ended up like being like, I think you should put another one here and here and here, because nobody likes to do I need to turn another 40 pages to find something, or do I not game.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And of course, the best thing added to chapter 3 is the door stats. Everybody knows that.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody agrees.
I love the like the 2-page spread on doors. It makes me so happy. Like as a dungeon master, I'm like, I should put a giant sticky note on this page because I feel like I will like right. Like how often are we running into issues with stupid doors?
It seems to be a very commonly shared campaign aspect of, you get to a door, and as soon as you start rolling dice, you just know that it's not going to work very well, just because it's a door. And having like you said, a 2-page spread on doors with some
it's 1 page. I lied. It's 1 page, but it is a full entire page.
I must be. I'm thinking of I think death might have gotten a 2-page.
That is my other.
That was actually a really good one.
Very good.
I'm really happy with that, especially with the way that it turned out. And that was one of the I ended up writing a bit on that because the way that death is handled varies so much across games. And when folks have started playing 30 years ago or more, like James Wyatt and Chris Perkins have been playing for so long, right? They have so much experience, right? But the mindset around character death and like AD&D versus the mindset around character death now is completely different, right?
Yeah.
And people get attached to their characters and they want to tell a story with their characters. And there's a lot of folks who just like, they actually don't want their character to die.
It's not a meat grinder anymore.
Yes. Yeah. And then you have other folks who are like, I really don't care if my character dies. Why are you so attached? We'll just roll up another character, right? And so having options so that a dungeon master can have tools and processes to follow, and that everybody at the table feels like that they have the option to kind of like play the way that they want to. I think that was a huge thought process, that already came, I think, in the drafts. I could tell that a lot of them were thinking about trying to find ways to give options for multiple sides, and that I think just has even increased throughout like the final version of this DMG. It just a lot of the other consultants, I can tell, brought in stuff. I'll be like turning the page and I was like, I don't know who thought about that. I don't know who added that, but that's brilliant. Like, wasn't me, but good on them.
So was that kind of then in a bubble? So did you talk with any of the other consultants, or was it mainly just here, just give your feedback specifically?
Yeah, so the general process is you work on your own and you give your feedback like privately, like you write your report. So I wrote like a 30-page report. I have no idea how much other consultants wrote. I have no idea if I did like the ADHD autistic overachieving thing or if I didn't. No idea. But I did end up working with Jen Kretschmer by accident, because the way that it works is that each book has a code name. And so you actually, even within Wizards of the Coast, like working and like freelancers, you use the code name. You can't be like, I'm working on, Planescape book. You're like, I'm working on code name Lemonade or whatever. And I co-work sometimes with Jen Kretschmer. And so I was co-working with her, and I was struggling around some of the Greyhawk stuff specifically. And I was like, the first draft, and I did see, I don't know if it was James Wyatt or Chris Perkins, but on one of the videos they did like allude to the fact that the Greyhawk did change very thoroughly based on consultation feedback. And I was kind of like trying to figure out how to present it and what direction to kind of like go, how to like encapsulate some of the issues with it. But I was trying to like dance around it because I can't tell her with the thing that I'm working on, right? And so just with a little bit I said, Jen was kind of like, are you working on, by chance, codename this? And I was like, yes. And we were working like on the same thing, on the same call, privately. Gosh. And it was just kind of like by chance. And so we ended up having quite a bit of discussions with the two of us. And we actually ended up asking for a meeting. And so we ended up meeting with James Wyatt to be able to chat like verbally, to have a meeting about some of our concerns and our thoughts around the way that Greyhawk was. It was just, it was a little bit more like somebody had taken like the original Greyhawk and had kind of just blown the dust off of it and made like some changes. But the way that it ended up being is like things there was too much information to be able to sort through, but not enough information to do anything with it. And so it ended up being like kind of like pages of like just like place names with like a couple of like 2 sentences worth of stuff and like a leader name and like some other stuff. And so and then there was just other issues with some of the stuff. And so we sat down and had a conversation and then like went separately to finish our consultation like reports. But when you're working as a freelancer, you are working generally like on your own and then giving your stuff, and then the writers or the leads will come together and like take a look at the feedback, or if you're writing, take a look at the writing. But I do know that they're working to get some like cultural and sensitivity feedback earlier on, which is exciting, because the earlier on you can like incorporate folks who have extensive amounts of like education on issues, the better off your stuff is.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
do you find the Greyhawk one was like the most improved from the draft then?
Yes, I think that we can safely give that section the most improved award. Yeah, 100%. I like the way that it's now. I think part of the issue was like Greyhawk is a setting that was built in some ways by piecemeal, right? It's a setting that evolves at the table of one particular game, right? And so then you kind of have this conglomeration of something that was built by piecemeal, and then you have to kind of approach it as somebody who is brand new and sort through it. And so it was very difficult to figure out what is Greyhawk good at? What actually is happening at Greyhawk? Is this setting about a whole pile of like is the setting about all the lands around Greyhawk? Is the setting about the city of Greyhawk? Is it about territory feuds? Because again, when it was created, it was kind of piecemeal, and it was back in AD so it had more wargaming roots. But that doesn't apply really much to the games today. There are some of those like flavors, but it's more now like little bits of spice instead of a foundational like concept of games, right? And so in some ways it had to be. I use the word reimagine, but that doesn't mean that it's been that the bones necessarily have changed, but you have to take this thing that was written at a very particular time, place, purpose, and figure out how to make it approachable and usable. And so the way that they separated it in kind of like campaign arcs and like conflicts, like Tiamat conflict or not whatever the ones are. My brain is Greyhawk's premise. The conflicts, the chromatic dragons, the elemental evil, and us.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you right away you're presented with here's what you can here's what this setting was built for. Here's kind of what it was designed for. Here is what's going on in the setting, and here's what you can do with it. Right. And incorporating this is what a chromatic dragon arc might look like at the different tiers, right? And really seeding these pages inside the campaigns chapter, right? This is supposed to be an example of how you would build a campaign or a campaign setting according to kind of the thought processes and the tools provided in the rest of the chapter. And so the way that they have incorporated that is just like really, really good. I really like it. I really, really like it now.
And I mean, really, with the updates and the changes that have gone into Greyhawk and the setting and everything, I think really kind of focuses on the theme of the entire DMG, which is, here's all the tools, here's the stuff, this is how we recommend it. But when it all comes down to it, it's your game. Do whatever you want. And I love the fact that, like, especially with the Greyhawk map, it's populated with so much stuff that isn't mentioned at all in the DMG. So you can see like the Tomb of Annihilation. It's like, it's just there. But in your version of it, it might just be, a kid's playground where they made up, like fun kid games, but they didn't want people stumbling in upon it. So they called it the Tomb of Annihilation. So it's scary. So nobody goes over there, it could be anything. And
it's a restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally a restaurant.
Totally a restaurant.
But it's
interesting that you talk about it with a restaurant, because I was going back through my consultation report this week, just kind of being like, what changed, right? And in one of my things, I talk about the fact that like what we want to do is like, if we want to, like, we're in the kitchen, we're making a cake. We need to know what the ingredients are, and we also need to know what the process is and all of the steps. Mm-hmm. If you don't give the ingredients, how do I know if I should use baking powder or baking soda, right? But if you don't give the process, then you don't know what to do with them, right? Like if I give you a bunch of flour and baking soda and other things, they'd be like, okay, make a cake. You'd be like, okay, thanks for the flower, Alyssa,
Yeah.
but I don't know what to do with this, right? And so like
Exactly.
that was a lot of my thought process, and I think that that's really reflected in some of these things where you go, here's a process and here's some ingredients, and you can mix and match, and do your own thing because it's your own table.
Exactly. Here's the basic cake, but if you want to add lemon to it or caramel or something like that, you throw in your own touches to like enhance it and make it better. And I mean, like I said, this new book just really captures that in a lot of the different chapters, like going through. My biggest thing, again, I'm just going back to it, like the beginning of adventures and beginning of the campaign. It's just step by step. This is the four things that you need, and then from there, it's just you're good. But it goes more in depth to give you all those different pieces and ideas to kind of help probe you along the way and push you into, hey, you know what, my players, they might like something like this, or here's an entirely different aspect or something, or a different way to go. So it's just, again, as a tool for, someone who does homebrew, it's perfect, and kind of retrains you into thinking about, what's best for my players so that all of us are enjoying this.
Yes, 100%. And I think that, you asked me before if I liked like this one better than the fourth edition DMG, and this is what I think that this one does better is the fourth edition DMG. I mean, fourth edition had a very particular identity and a very like it was like this is like we're doing heroic fantasy. This is what the game is, and so the DMG supported that and supported it well. But because the game was not necessarily designed to be played with like a wide spectrum of like fantasy types or game styles, the DMG didn't support that very much. And so it's kind of funny because in one of my like Twitter rants, I think I was basically like, you know what? If they made a new DMG, they could basically just take the first two chapters of the fourth edition DMG and use that. And like one of the first drafts had a lot of that in there, and it was like I was reading it and I was like, what? Like, this is good, but it's missing something. What are the vibes here? There's something off with the vibes. And then I realized it had to do with that. And it had to do with the fact that the game has expanded and there's a lot of different kinds of stories being told now with fifth edition, right? It has this very, very wide and broad tool set and right. And so there are games that feature much more like stories, like how do you want to define it? But more storytelling, more focus on social encounters, more focus on those kinds of things, right? And so they really did go back and really insert all of those additional options and thoughts and ideas into the DMG. And so when you're reading an explanation, there are examples or aspects from more than just a very like combat focused game, for example, right? Or different kinds of stories or different flavors of stories. I love the pages where it goes through the different flavors of fantasy and it breaks it down and gives you campaign ideas for that. And that's one of the things that is so much stronger in this DMG because it gives you tools for more than just one kind of fantasy flavor, and then it gives you like little mini recipe ideas. Here's a little stir fry recipe. You swap the snow peas if you don't like them.
Yeah, and I mean it seems to fit very well in there. The multiverse is the main setting of D&D now, type thing, where it's not Greyhawk anymore. It's not the Sword Coast. They really have gone huge with the multiverse aspect, and I think that ties in exactly to what you were talking about, and them recognizing and realizing and now supporting wholeheartedly that it is that giant wide base of fantasy that covers many genres now and not just the heroic fantasy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting how they added in the flavors of fantasy in chapter 5, in addition to like your heroic fantasy and swords and sorcery, say that 5 times fast.
Yeah.
Right. They also added like supernatural horror and
Yeah.
and then also put like intrigue and mystery and like war in there, right? Because the Dragonlance setting and campaign is like a war focused campaign, and so they've really added those additional things and put that all under flavors of fantasy. Going like you can do intrigue as a flavor of fantasy, you can do mystery as a flavor of fantasy. There's a place for that here, and here are some of the things that you can do. And the conflicts that you can use. I love that. I love breaking it down, that they broke it down into conflicts.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just kind of riffing off of this a little bit. I know you are a huge accessibility advocate.
Yes.
I wanted to dive in a little bit on how does one, especially with you being the consulting on this, how does one make something accessible? Like what are you looking for from a language perspective? Obviously we've talked a little bit about making sure that new dungeon masters, game masters are supported in this and not just all this high level knowledge that only like people have been playing a long time will care about. So what is the mindset going into, I want to make this accessible?
Yeah. So like if we approach it first, you can do this multiple ways, but there's a couple of different aspects. One of the nitty gritties is vocabulary, right? So when you look at like some of the explanations in the lore or in the cosmology or even in other explanations, going like if this is going to be for like teenagers are going to be using this, if folks like it's rated for 12 plus. We also know that we have an average, reading ability for adults at about a grade 5 level. So that means that your vocabulary needs to be brought down. You need to find ways to explain complex concepts without using like complex words. Your word choice needs to be completely down. So I would be reading like a paragraph when I was consulting, and then I would I have kids. My kids are range from age 9 to age 15. And so I thought, okay, would my 11-year-old understand this, right? Because maybe it's not for 11 plus, but when you think about average, reading abilities of adults, in the United States and in Canada, it's not that much higher. So if I use these words to my 11-year-old, would they be able to understand it? So that's like, in some ways, that's low-hanging fruit. It's not easy to do because these are still complex concepts. And so to try to find the language to explain even just like the cosmology and bring that down, that's not easy, but it's easy to identify, but not always easy to like solve that problem, right? Then the way that I think about it is one of the things that makes it most accessible relates to executive functioning. So, right, executive functioning is your brain's ability to separate things into steps, into a logical sequence, and to order them, to take a big, huge issue, a big project, and to break it down into small, meaningful steps. And so this goes hand in hand with like new folks, as well as being accessible for neurodivergent folks who are, ADHD or autistic, or have similar like brain neurodivergencies, is that struggle to be able to know what lies beyond the text. If you don't say it, you can't imply it, because you cannot guarantee that that folks are going to be able to infer it from implications. And so you have to break it down. And so it's at every single step going, is there more steps to this, right? So like if I told my kid to make me, let's say, like a coffee from my little, Keurig coffee pot, did I remember to tell them, right, to put the pot in and to close it all the way and make sure that it locks, right? Did I think about that? Did I think about the fact that they need to make sure that there's water in there, because that gets filled up manually? Is that a step that I remember? Did I take all of the steps and did I break them down? Is there a smaller step here, right? Grab a cup. okay, that sounds great. That sounds like a single step. But if the kitchen is dirty and there's no clean cups, they might have to wash a cup. Have I thought about that? And that's a silly little tiny step. And as adults, we're kind of like, that is a ridiculous thing to have to think about. But if you put that in D&D terms, right? If I have to tell my 7-year-old that they have to, wash a cup before, you know, pouring themselves juice, right? They may not know that how to do that, or that there's steps to that thing. And so when you
Exactly.
take that into D&D terms, going, you know, if your instructions are about, for an adventure, you take your encounter, you start it with a good start, and you lead it to the end, but you don't tell them how do you build an encounter? What are
Hmm.
what are all the aspects that go into an encounter? Or what are actually all the aspects that go into a hook? So like an instruction of like having a good character hook that motivates your players, that is correct. That is indeed a big step. But where do you get one from? How do you decide what to do? Do you just is there anything beyond a tavern picking up rumors, right? So a lot of accessibility is around that. It's going, is there an implied step here that I would do automatically or automagically? My brain just does that. Or is there something that goes one layer deeper? And there's a limit to what you can do. There are some things that I would love to have fleshed out a little bit more. One of them is brainstorming. There's a really great paragraph about keeping a list of ideas. That is something that creative people do. Creative people who have been in creating, they're brainstorming like all the time, right? We're always thinking about our D&D games or what we're going to write about or whatever, right? But that's actually a skill, right, in and of itself. And so you do need to have an instruction to like keep a list of ideas. They're not all going to be good. They're not all going to work, but keep a list because you never know when they'll come, right? There's a limit to how much of the nitty gritties you can fit into one book. And I think they did a really great job of striking a balance between trying to get all those steps out for folks to be accessible, while, keeping to an already fairly chunky page count.
Yeah. Man,
Exactly.
you're speaking to my real life. Like especially especially when you have kids, you find this out more because a lot of times I'll do stuff like that without even thinking about it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, go do this, or why wouldn't you know how to do XYZ? Right? And it's because in my mind, obviously I know how to do it. I don't have to think about it that much. But when
Yeah.
you're talking to someone who doesn't know about it, or talking to your kid or something like that, you do need to lay out the steps for things because they don't have that task list in their head. They may not even know how to do some of those steps. So I think that's an amazing point because that's not just a D&D thing.
No,
That's an
no,
everyday life thing.
no.
That is an incredible tip just from an accessibility standpoint to help people out with and give give grace as people do things new for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had to create training manuals for work, and I've had to go through the exact same process of like, okay, you know, this is how you do a certain thing, you know, literal step by step of this. Click here, do this. You were doing this because of this, and with screenshots and pictures, like everything going in it. Because yeah, if you look at it like a job, it's literally I don't know how to do anything. I'm starting at
Yeah.
zero. So and I'm just gonna, you know, gush about it again, but just the ordering of the way that the book
Yeah.
works and stuff is
They did
just
so good.
really pointing towards that. Like
Yeah.
again, chapter 2, running the game, everything is built upon everything else. And then,
Yeah.
the toolbox is there. It's like, oh, here's kind of the supplemental stuff that's just kind of everything that will fit into this before you even get to creating a single adventure. It's like you have all the tools that you need to, craft that adventure. And then once the adventure's done, you're like, oh, well, a campaign is kind of just a bunch of adventures together with a
Yeah.
throughput. And again, just you take that first little cup of flour and pour it into the bowl. And then from there, you're on your way with each step. And I appreciate the work and time that you've and everybody else has put into this, because again, it is very helpful for someone who's just starting and who has definitely been playing for quite a while,
Yeah.
because, the stuff that we take for granted or things that we've stopped doing because we're deep into a campaign or something like that can really kind of revitalize things and, just add that extra little bit of frosting on top of that cake.
Yeah, and I think, one of the comments I think I put in my consultation report was this idea of like, I know that this is for new players, and here's why it's important for new players, but it's also really important for like ADHD and autistic folks. And let's be honest, like our hobby is chock full of neurodivergent folks. Like we have a statistically higher average number of ADHD and autistic folks.
100%. 100%.
We flock to this kind of thing, right? And so you've got to write it for them too, because I'm ADHD and autistic, and there are things that I have been doing for years that I still have to mentally go through a checklist because my brain doesn't always create an automatic process file for it. I have to do it manually. And so the book has to serve that, because we have a lot of them in the community.
Yep. Being ADHD myself, I completely relate to sometimes the brain goes, no, you're turning that into a task list and you have to check it off before you do the next thing, or else I'm going to make you suffer. So it's having that style is incredibly helpful.
Definitely.
I also just really love, I know we've talked a lot about chapter 5 and chapter 4.
But they're so good.
Also, they are so good. Can we just gush a minute about chapters 1 and 2? The way that this book just gently onboards a new DM and is right in the get-go is here's what a DM does, right? And here's things to keep in mind. It's okay to make mistakes, don't worry about those kind of things. It's not a competition. Right? Gives you a basic overview of the things you need. And then right away it goes into preparing a session and how to run a session, because that's the beginning. A DM's I'm sitting here for my first, it's not just about so a lot of the later half of the DMG is about creating your own adventures and your own stuff. But there are people who need to know how to run D&D from a pre-made module, who maybe aren't going to be writing their own campaign conflicts. They're going to pick up a pre-made module, but it's still here's how you prepare a session. Here's how you run a session. And that's one of the things about wash yourself a coffee cup before you go to turn on the coffee pot, kind of a thing. It seems self-explanatory for folks who've been there for a long time, but it's just 1 hour preparation time. If you have an extra hour, if you have 3 hours, here are the things to prepare. I just I love this page so much. So much.
And can we gush about the art a little bit too? Because
I feel
like
we do that though.
I really support. Oh, go ahead.
I gotta point out just, and not only do you have the how to run a session and everything, but you have a just straight up example of play, and that right there opens the eyes of so many people just to kind of be like, oh, this is okay. So this is how things are kind of playing out. This is what happens. You get into the whole mindset of okay, the DM knows things that they have to hold back. Players are kind of figuring things out and doing things, and kind of gives you not exactly a step-by-step of how the encounter is going to go every single time, but it's in this instance, this is how things play out. And then the messaging directly after that of every DM is unique. And that to me is such an important thing that everybody needs to know. Because do I look at Brendan Lee Mulligan and think, I wish I could be him, or Matt Mercer, or Deborah Ann Wall, or B. Dave Walters, any of them? I wish I could do that. But the thing is, I think it's B. Dave who said, I'm the best version of my DM, and that is great. So, if I'm doing something that I'm enjoying, that my players are enjoying, that's what matters. And if you go in expecting someone else's DM to be your DM, it's not going to be a good time. You have to understand that you're going to run it your own way, and whatever game you're in, they're going to run it a certain way, and you're there for the ride. If you enjoy it, great. If you don't, you find a different DM.
I think it's also really amazing that the very next they go from they give you every DM is unique in some play styles and stuff, and then the next page is this game expectation sheet and these guidelines on ensuring fun for all, right? And it's basically, so you're unique, right? And so here's a way to help communicate the things that you're interested in running in your game so everybody can be on the same page. Here's a way to set expectations. Here are some things that maybe you want to think about so that everybody comes to the table, right, knowing kind of what to expect, that nobody's going to end up in a game where suddenly there's fantasy racism, and that's fine for some tables, but they didn't want to play on that. They find that triggering, right? Going like, it's fine to play what you want, but here's a way to help make sure that it's everybody is coming on the same page. You get to DM the way that you want. Players get to play what they want because everybody's coming together and having a conversation first. I love that they laid it out like that. It's not even labeled as a session 0, but it's just ensuring
it's the concept of the session 0.
But that you can come back and return to this like time and time like again, right? And the beautiful thing about these kinds of things is they free you up into actually exploring some of these deep issues if everybody's interested in it. Because when we have a conversation and everybody's okay with, exploring this aspect, maybe everybody's okay with exploring what, what misogyny might look like in this particular, campaign setting related to, right, egotistical man in power who, has something against women. There's no real world examples of this at all, right? But maybe people really do. They want to explore that. They want to explore that. They want to explore defeating that, right? And having that powerful feeling. You don't have to wonder, is everybody okay with this? Is it okay if I do that? Maybe I shouldn't. What everybody knows what they signed up for. Everybody's like, yes, let's do this. Let's defeat the misogynistic jerk.
Yeah,
it frees you. It frees you.
Yeah, D&D, I mean, it's been often described in a lot of ways, and this is not just D&D, this is just for tabletop RPGs in general, have been described, or people use them a lot as a way to explore themes like that in a safe environment,
definitely.
Which I think is they use it for, there's studies now of where they're using it for therapy. It's a huge deal.
I mean, you think about the entire genre of horror is essentially, right, exploring these really, deep, dark, twisted, horrific things, but in a safe and contained environment. There's an entire genre dedicated to that. And it's not bad in and of itself, but nobody wants to be thinking that they're going to be playing a cutesy, animal game and end up, in Cthulhu horror, right? And just the way that this leads you into communicating limits and talking about limits, and also what happens when there's conflicts at the table, when a player is, playing lawful evil so that they can be a jerk. How do you deal with that? I feel like 30%, 50% of all the posts on D&D Reddit are addressed directly in the very first chapter of this book. And in a way that is actually explains it, gives you tools.
It's funny because it made me think of, it's like the written version. Have you guys seen the clip of John Barenthal's podcast where he had Deborah Ann Wall on, and she basically just took 8 to 10 minutes and just basically, he's like, what is D&D, Deborah? And she's like, well, and just basically took the next 8 or 10 minutes and literally just ran a little mini game for him without him needing to know anything.
Yeah.
And it just the flow and how it works, and then he started getting into it, and it like that's what that chapter kind of reminded me of when I was starting reading through that. I was like, because I send that clip to tons of people, and just like, this is D&D. Just like, I could not explain it better myself than these just like 8 random minutes that Deborah and Wall just made up. And that's exactly the type of thing where what we were just talking about is like, this is what this is. That's all there is to it. Really, when you break it down, it's much it's not near as hard as some conceptually you might think it is if you like are watching watching somebody, especially professional, because that's who you usually end up watching when you watch an actual play. These are professionals. They make it look easy, but when you break it down to its base, it is pretty easy.
I'm just looking forward to the new subreddit, D&D horror stories, but I actually read the first page of, or the first chapter of the 2024 DMG, so it ended well.
Yeah,
It's a bit of a long subreddit name, but I think it'll work.
There's just so much good stuff in this very first chapter, and like even like there's even this half of a column on what happens if you have an overly cautious player. Like that is something that like experienced DMs don't always know how to handle, or don't, maybe are creating overly cautious players because they're, using random perils or whatever.
Everything's a mimic.
Yeah, everything's a mimic, right? It's this stuff, that's what I meant by what I said way back before, was like, this is built for new folks, but it's also built for experienced folks, because we also have these issues and we don't always know how to solve them well, or what's like contributing to them.
Yeah. Okay, Ben, I'm going to go back to the art.
Yeah, sorry. I had to sidetrack.
No, it's okay. I love it. Sidetrack away.
Gorgeous.
But I just love, and this is just like, the art in the player's handbook was incredible. The art in the DMG is incredible. But I really like the first like 2 chapters, because there's just something kind of, and this is different, right? Like the art in both the player's handbook and then DMG is in a lot of ways different than what the previous books have been. And I know some people I've seen are just, disappointed. Just, why isn't this the art style? Or, why do they look like XYZ or whatever? And it's just like, I think it tells a story better in the way that this is just not a war game anymore, right? This is a vehicle to tell these massive, intricate stories where you actually really care about the character that you're playing and the world you're inhabiting. And so, but I mean, just even starting out the pictures of, here's people at a table. They might look like you too.
Yeah.
And they're just getting ready, and like, oh, look, there's the transition if this player is the paladin or the sorcerer or something, and this is what they look like, and this is the character, and look at the board layout, and this is like a battle scene and stuff. I honestly really, really like that they're kind of representing the words in chapters 1 and 2, and then kind of giving you this is the table. This is the actual table they're playing at. These are their characters. This is what it kind of looks like as well.
The art is just it. I think you hit the nail right on the head there. The art tells the story of the DMG. I think that the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, the art was nice. It wasn't, the art's not bad. Each piece is nice. Each piece is gorgeous. But here it is just so thoughtfully woven into the Dungeon Master's Guide. Like I'm looking at, I got my book open to pages on interparty conflict, and there's a whole picture here of 3 characters who are experiencing interparty conflict. It tells the story about how of the words on the page in the way that the Dungeon Master's Guide did not do before. And it's just, it does it in such a brilliant way throughout the entire DMG. Every piece of art is serving to give a visual representation of the words on a page, not simply a pretty picture to look at or to break up the text, but a visual story representation of the word on the page.
Yeah, and I mean, if you like art, both the new player's handbook and this, and I'm hoping the new monster manual too. Like, part of the reason they are thicker is because there is more art, and I love I like digital. Digital's great. I love digital. It's incredibly helpful, but there's something about just holding the book in your hand and paging through and then looking at the pictures and such and reading. I just feel like I can appreciate it more, and there's a lot more to appreciate.
Plus all the little baby creatures on the tracking sheets.
I really like them. I know that they're not everybody's cup of tea, but I feel like if
So
they're not,
cute.
you can probably like do your own. But they're so cute.
They are. I'm looking at the little beholder right now.
I don't know. I think part of it, like I look at that and it just helps me to remember that like this game is supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like as I'm sitting here and creating campaign conflicts, there's these little fun creatures that remind me that like, no, that's right. This is a game and we're here to have fun. And if something, a little bit silly happens in my, serious little encounter here, that's okay because this is our goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about accessibility. The tracking sheets, like those just in and of themselves, we didn't have those before. Those didn't exist from an official standpoint, at least. So having those types of things, especially for newer game masters, to go and, okay, I can fill this out. Or, okay, these are the things I need to think about for this encounter or for this town or city or XYZ. Oh, cool. There's some tables for this built right in. Then I can do stuff. Were they in the old DMG? Maybe. I don't know. They could have been, but no one could find them. So it didn't matter. That was, I mean, like you said, half the subreddit stuff is people asking questions and people going, oh, it's in the DMG. And it's just like, you have a poorly made book if someone has read it and then someone goes, oh yeah, that's on page whatever, and the person goes, oh, it was okay, that's
Are you
cool.
sure?
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I think one of the ones I really love is the DM's character tracker, which is like in the middle of, we're back at chapter 5 because we love chapter 5 so much, right? But it's this tracker that walks you through all of this stuff, right? That it talks about the pages of the DMG, talks about like the campaign characters and like planning out the character arcs and kind of their goals and quirks and whims and those kind of things. And then it gives you a place to like track that, which I mean is so helpful. I look at this page and I'm like, oh, who are the characters' family, friends, and foes? That's a great question, and it's a great place to keep it down, because when I'm going to create character hooks or hooks for my adventures later, this is where I'm going to draw from, right?
That's a huge one.
I love that they've got the player motivation in there. I absolutely love that they added so the 2014 DMG has player motivation information. They added one additional one, which I was really happy to see. Previously it was called Watching, the Watcher. That was in the 4th edition one. Didn't show up in the 2015 one, but they renamed it Socializing. And because there are people that show up to your D&D table and they don't really they're just there to have fun. They want to watch, they want to eat snacks, they want to enjoy the fun, they want to partake about it, but they don't really want anything special. They don't want a spotlight, they don't want to have to make decisions. They want to show up to game night and have a good night with their friends, and that's okay. And you can note that on your character sheet so that you can remember that as you're planning character arcs and going, maybe I just want to throw a little pieces of confetti from this character because they don't actually want an entire arc around them.
Yeah.
Do not disturb.
Exactly. Yeah, just having that right at the top, it's like, oh, this person, they really want to do just combat a whole bunch. Okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and even that out with my storyteller friends over here and everything. And one of the things too is that, I mean, it kind of talks about it. In fact, Ginny D just did a video on this not too long ago too, about how people can be in multiple types of motivation and everything, and how sometimes, it can change over the course of a campaign, especially as you're kind of, learning and getting used to a character. So having a tracker sheet and being able to kind of, mark and change things and do everything is super duper helpful on this. And I absolutely love it.
I love that even just like right before that, they have a section on like getting player input, and they say like you can ask them directly, that you can get indirect
Yes.
input where you're
Yes.
watching, but also remember that it's okay to ask them directly what they like, what they want to see. You don't always have to keep secrets from your players. You can talk with your players about some of the things that they want to see, and they can be surprises and secrets in the way that they are revealed, and they're surprises to the character. But you can ask the player directly about the things that they would like.
Yeah. And that's a really good, fun way to surprise other players if you're working in cahoots with one of yours or with one of them.
Yeah. Or you've got the like the stars and wishes that you do at the end of your session, where you're like, hey, how did the session go? What did you enjoy? Is there anything you have concerns with, or what would you like to see more of? That's something I integrated for the very first time in my current campaign, and I really like it a lot because it's kind of a nice like chill down too after the session, when you can just kind of go around and talk, oh man, this moment was awesome, or this thing was nice, or I wish we could do XYZ. And it's, as a DM, it's incredibly helpful.
It's also really helpful for like DM aftercare, right? Because like when you go to DM, like it's very like your dungeon mastering is a vulnerable thing. You are creating a thing and you're putting it in front of your friends, and you're like, play the thing that I lovingly created and spent time on. And then when they tell you the aspects that you like, when you get hit with like a little bit of a vulnerability hangover, when you're like, I hope that I didn't mess this up, or I hope that they like this, you can be like, oh, remember 2 sessions ago? Bryson said he absolutely loved the gelatinous cube. Fantastic. Yay me.
Oh, it's huge. That I cannot tell you how many times during some of my other campaigns where I didn't do this on any sort of regular basis, where you'd step back and it's just like, I think they had a good time. Or the imposter syndrome hits you, and it goes, oh man, I didn't do that right. Or, oh man, was that actually fun for them? Or, oh man, I messed that up completely. That probably ruined everything. And in reality, your players are smiling and laughing and having all sorts of fun. But it hits, like you said, it's a very vulnerable thing. And when you create and then give that over to other people to play in and around, it's a really big deal. So having some sort of feedback or constructive criticism moments, or what do you want more of, or I'm having so much fun with this, just keep doing what you're doing, is such an important thing.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So I've got to ask, we've talked a lot about, kind of what you've touched on, what you contributed. Is there one specific thing that you're most proud of that made it into the book?
I would say I'm actually really proud of the character sheet that we were just talking about. That's one of the things, and I think this really exemplifies like the creative process and the way that multiple people are touching on a thing. Because I was reading my report, and I noticed that I was like, this would be, here's some feedback on this section of writing, and I think it would be helpful to have a journal page about this, so that DMs could actually track that. There wasn't one in the original draft. But like, it's that's one of those like high level comments where you're not in all the nitty gritties, but you just be like, I think that we need this thing. And then you have other folks who go, okay, what actually needs to be in those things? How do we take all of the other feedback and throw it in and put it in there? So that's like one thing. I think that I'm also just really proud of. I mean, the way that chapter 4 and 5 ended up being, just the way that their flow is so much better. I love the encounter pages actually in chapter 4. I love how one of the things that I had given feedback on was the idea of like what it actually is an encounter. Like at its core, you need to have an objective. You can't just have like monsters, but the characters have to have a goal to do something. And taking those things and putting them into like, what does that actually look like? In the 2014 DMG, there was a page on character objectives, and it was just like the headings: make peace, protect an NPC or an object, retrieve an object. But that's one of those things where it's like, that seems like a single step, but there's actually a lot of little things to think about. And so I love the way that they came back in and like, expanded on that and made that really accessible, because like encounters are the bread and butter of D&D. You can have a bad and meandering campaign that doesn't feel bad because you've got good encounters. If you muck up your character arcs and your campaign arcs and your conflict waffles a little bit, but you've got really, really interesting, encounters, that can cover a multitude of planning and campaign like mistakes. It is like it covers up so much. And on the other way, you can have a really great campaign arc and enemies and like villains and evil villain plans, sketched out. But if you can't create your encounters in such a way that your characters can engage with the story at the table, then your all of your nefarious villain plans just kind of fall short. And so like the work and the stuff that went into all of the encounters and making sure that there was tools for all of those things, I really like that. Yeah.
Very cool. I mean, I know we've been talking for a bit here, but I do have one last question, or well, two questions, but one of them, I'm just curious, was there anything that after the whole process was done that kind of like came to mind that you're like, oh, I wish I would have said this back when I was working on it? Like any sort of concept or thing, like when all was said and done, you're like, shoot, I'm 3 days too late to submit this.
There absolutely was. And there was one very specific thing that I had spent like, I don't know, like probably 2 hours trying to remember what it was. Like I was like literally brainstorming because I knew that there was something that I had like thought of the night before. Right. And I was like, I need to remember to do that. And like, I'm sitting there compiling the last bits and going through it, could not remember it. 3 days later, I woke up and I do not remember what it was exactly, but it had to do with chapter 5 and like the way that it was structured and like the campaigns. Because chapter 5, the campaign stuff, the original draft ended up looking like a lot of like recipe ingredients, but not a lot of really good process. There was too many ingredients and not enough process. And I was struggling to, figure out exactly what was the problem and what would be a better process, what things needed to go first and in what order, and what was important, what was missing, because it felt a little messy. And I know what had to do with that. It had to do with figuring out how to lay those things out, and I couldn't remember what it was, and I still can't remember what it was. Yeah. But the chapter ended up being fine. So
it works as it is. But
in true form, I will probably remember it again tomorrow morning.
Well, that's great because you'll be able to help out in the 2034 DMG to help process it a little better that way. And then My last question, and I'm curious about this. As you're going through the process of, seeing the different chapters, reading them and everything, was there something that was either in there or that, maybe you firsthand know that somebody added, that is like such a good idea that you're pulling from that you've never used before in your own games?
Something that I saw that I was like immediately I loved,
Yeah.
even though I do kind of use them. I loved the magical contagions and the hazards. Like there's a lot of new like wilderness hazards. And I love that. I don't use a lot of traps necessarily, but like the idea of like here are some things that you could find in a dungeon, but you could also find them way out, in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. That was like in a chapter that I got for information but didn't actually directly touch, but I liked it. I was like, this is good. This is really, really good. I think a lot of the stuff with like the NPCs, my dungeon master weak point is like NPCs, which is not very surprising. I'm autistic, so the fact that I had trouble with NPCs and social interaction in my games, it tracks, right? It tracks. And so looking at that, looking at the way that they given some really excellent tools for running NPCs. And same kind of goes with like monsters. There's a wonderful little table for like connecting to monsters, which I love because sometimes I have a hard time going like, why are monsters in here? How are they interacting? And be like, oh, one's bullying the other. Okay, that adds like a whole new dynamic. But yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally.
Did I answer your question? Did I just go on a little rant?
No, perfect. I got everything I needed. That's awesome.
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think if I have like any closing question type things. I don't know. I just, you can tell they put, I mean, all the writers, obviously, you can tell they put far more care and nuance into this one than the original one. Mm-hmm. And I know part of that is budget, part of that is learning, but I think a lot of things have evolved quite a bit. And some of the things that you were able to do, they might not have even thought about doing in the original. So I think that's a huge deal.
And I will say that like, like you do end up working quite a bit on your own, but we did have a meeting with like James Wyatt and he was just like absolutely fantastic. We had some very severe criticism and I walked away from that and I was like, I want to be James Wyatt when I grow old because like, it is not easy to sit in a meeting and to listen to your consultants kind of like tear apart the thing that you have created. And he just like listened and asked questions and was completely receptive and it shows, right? And so, sometimes I think people kind of go like, how does that work? It like, are they listening? And yes, like the answer is so much yes. I think that people don't always realize like the length of time that it takes to like publish a book. It's like 2 years. And so when you're beginning to like see a book, right, the conversations that you put in, the feedback that you get, it's 2 years old basically by the time it's published, right? Mm-hmm. They had a complete draft ready for us and that we gave feedback on a year ago, right? And so when we're having conversations and when we see change happening in the community, whatever that change may be, whether that is regarding certain subjects, but also like just play styles and the way that the game might be evolving naturally with the way that like our media is evolving, the way that people consume it or the kinds of stories that are being told, that's 2 years old basically, right? By the time it's published. But they are, I have all kinds of feelings about large corporations, but I have a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings for the people who are like boots on the ground, folks like James Wyatt. Like they care, they want it they want it to be good, right? And knowing how much had to be like rewritten, not just from my feedback, but knowing all the feedback the other consultants did. This was like, it was a big task. I can only imagine it was a big task for them to do all of those additional rewrites and then get it through editing right in order for it to be published. So just nothing but good things to say about the folks who are trying to make good products. The folks who play D&D and are making like the own kind of products that they want to use and that can be used by others playing the game that they love.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, you nailed it on the head right there. You know, something that just going through the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and especially hearing about this whole process, you do know that the people who really worked on these books are passionate about it. They want the best product out there. So yeah. You know, criticism is going to happen, you know, especially if you're reaching out for consultants, but you know, they got the right people to do it. You know, first of all, you're not going to be like, this sucks. It's just, you know, hey,
well,
this sucks,
I mean,
but do it this way.
Enough, I was reading my consultant report and I was like, wow, Alyssa, some steel balls there. Because there was places where I was like, I think there was one place where I was like, this is like the world's worst version of trying to connect pictures with red string meme that I have ever seen.
But you gave constructive feedback on top of that, right?
Yes.
And that's what matters.
I think my goal in my report was also that hopefully there was some interesting comments to break up the serious stuff, because I think that reports should be semi-interesting to read.
Oh yeah.
As well as informative.
Definitely.
Yeah, and this is why I love hearing about this, because a lot of times most people just see the faceless corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't see or they don't know about the people behind it who, in spite of capitalism's best efforts, are trying to actually care about the thing that they are making and provide a good, fun, interesting product to the people who care about the game and care about playing it. So I love hearing about that and the passion behind the actual books of the people who are going, yes, we care. We're doing the best we can. And that is why I continue to support them, is not because of the company, it's because of the people behind it.
Yeah, and I mean, I spent all of my December and January reading, like last year, which was maybe not the best timing, right? But, you know, reading and thinking and making notes and rereading and making notes and compiling feedback and rethinking. It's like, right, like, you know, you're doing nothing but like breathing this to try to like really encapsulate it and make it the best that you can be. And I know that I'm not the only one, right? Like all the consultants, all of the folks working on it, you know, we're all just a bunch of like silly nerds who just love D&D. Like some of us are really just like silly nerds who yelled on Twitter and got themselves hired semi-accidentally, right? Like we just love the game and want it to be the best that it possibly can.
And that's the same passion that they have there too, which is why they brought you in. And you were a perfect person to do that for.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun in the end. It was work, but it was a lot of fun to be able to dig into it.
Yeah. It's great when work can be fun too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, well that was absolutely wonderful. Again, we love talking to you. Thank you so much for like just giving us some insight behind the DMG. It's, I mean, a new DMG for Dungeons and Dragons is obviously a very big deal because it doesn't happen super often. And so being able to take part and help shape that and help try and make it a better book for both new DMs and experienced ones is just a huge deal. So thank you so much for sharing all those insights and such from all you've been doing. And obviously, I want to give you a little bit of time to shout out where people can find you. I don't know if you've done any huge blue sky rants yet, but they're probably coming at some point. So if you want to,
they will be coming.
they'll
Yes.
be coming. They'll be coming. So if you want to let people know where to find you, also you have some DM's Guild stuff that you have done, which is super cool. So I wanted to give you a chance to shout out anything that you wanted to, so people looking for you can find you.
Yeah. So in addition to, ranting on social media, I am a writer and a designer. I have so far written 2 adventures. One of them I wrote and published on the DM's Guild myself. It's called Fate's Lingering Shadow. And the second one is it's called Up the Beanstalk. That one I was commissioned by Zipper on Disney. And he publishes things and they are sold and the proceeds go to charity. So that second adventure is it's a play on Jack and the Beanstalk. You get to climb a beanstalk and get onto a giant's cloud castle. Find your way through it. There's some Care Bears with the serial number filed off called Small Bears up on there. A lot of really fun encounters, and the goal is to steal the treasure back from the giant. So that is called Up the Beanstalk, and it's on Drive-Thru RPG. I have been working on a large adventure with some other folks. I started it before I did the DMG consulting, and we had to put it on hold while I dug into this. So it's not out yet, but it is a cross between Curse of Strahd. It's a what happens after Curse of Strahd, but with like Spelljammer, it's campy. It's got like some Star Wars like themes with the serial number filed off of Star Wars things. It's really fun, just really fun. It's got a little bit of like Castlevania, finding the pieces of Strahd with just all kinds of really fun things. And so you can keep an eye out for that. I'm writing it together with Robert Reeve and some other folks, and it will be like a really full big book. But I can't say a lot yet, but it's so fun, you guys. It's like, Curse of Strahd in space with very campy feels. Anyway,
all for it.
Yes.
Yeah. So you said this is a post Curse of Strahd thing.
Yes.
Ooh, see, I'm playing through Curse of Strahd right now.
Yes.
With my DM.
So the way that it's being written and designed is giving you different options depending on some of the choices you made in Curse of Strahd or like the endings that you got in Curse of Strahd. So it's a bit sandboxy, but it still has like a very distinctive story. It's got like a pile of different like character options and some new subclasses. It's gonna be so great, you guys. I can't wait. As you tell, you can keep updated on that and all of my other stuff on Blue Sky, Alyssa.Visscher at Blue Sky. And then my website, my very neglected website that I started before I got a whole pile of paid work and had to like neglect it. But I will have my new stuff on there soon, promise. AlyssaVisscher.com, and all of my stuff will be on there. There's a link to my D&D Beyond articles there as well, if that's something that anybody wants to check out.
Which you have done quite a few of.
Mm-hmm.
I have. There's some really good ones in there too.
That is super awesome. We will have all those links on the show notes at dndiscussions.com. And then also, speaking of D&D Beyond, this was kind of just a random drop that I was not expecting. But I did want to shout out that MCDM's Illrigger is now on D&D Beyond. And this is the revised version of the Illrigger. I believe Sadie was the lead on that. And we had such a fun time talking with her a little while ago, and I know that she put a lot into this rework. And having played the class before, in a little short Candlekeep adventure, I can wholeheartedly endorse it. It is very fun, and this is one of the things I disagree with Jeremy Crawford on, and I think the design space for more classes is very very fertile, and MCDM themselves have done three such that are very good: the Ill Rigger, the Talent, and the Beast Heart. But there are a multitude of incredibly well done full on classes that third parties have done, and it's really exciting to see them starting to make their way to like the big digital experience that is D&D 5th edition. So if you want to check that out, we will have a link to that in the show notes as well. Oh, okay. Well, we're gonna let Alyssa go because we've kept her for a while, and it was a wonderful conversation.
I had so much fun. I
We
had
did
so
too.
much fun.
It was
Thank
so
you
great.
for
It
having
was
me
so
on.
great.
Thank you so
I
much
feel
for
like we
joining
could
us
probably
again.
talk for another 2 hours
Oh,
because
yes.
this book is so chunky and I love talking to you guys, but I don't think that your audience wants like a 4 hour show. We're
You'd
gonna
be
stop at some
surprised.
point. At some
Yeah.
point.
I
That's
mean,
right.
honestly, if I didn't have to work tomorrow and it wasn't late tonight, we could keep going for a few hours. There's so much to talk about. You're right. And it's always such a lovely time having you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
As always, before we go, we usually talk a little bit about what we've been doing in our home games. Personally, we had lots going on, and ended up just getting together for a chill night. Did not end up doing our D&D our last session, but we will be playing in a few days, so I'm excited to do that as the players continue to find out information and get on in the city. And Alyssa, I know I didn't prepare you at all, and I don't know if you've been playing recently or had anything super fun happen. But if you did, you are welcome to share any fun anecdotes.
I don't know if I have a fun anecdote. We've been kind of like switching off DMs. I just ran the first half of a one shot from Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. That
Oh, such a great book.
I need to step back from DMing because I had a conference and I have other stuff going on. And so now my friend B is DMing again. And so we switched back to our Witchlight campaign. And we are
Oh, so
like,
fun.
we are really close to, we're about to confront the third hag. And then we get to go and, go into Tasha's castle. So like we're really excited because
It's
we've
so
been working
exciting.
through this for almost like 2 years, and now we're like right at the end. We get the last hag, and then we get to get her.
Very cool.
That's awesome. I've heard such good things about Witchlight.
We've had a lot of fun. I'm playing Zuri, a like half druid, a half dryad druid. Who speaks with a Dutch accent, who is
Amazing.
modeled after my 85-year-old Dutch immigrant grandmother.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's like an 8 charisma. It is the best. It is so much fun.
Oh, that's so fun. That's so fun.
That's awesome.
Ben, what about you?
I was on vacation and we didn't play, but we're gonna be playing this weekend, so I will definitely have stuff to report.
Say lots of exciting things next time.
Yes.
Next time. I love it. Is the character an older character? Like is the character that you're playing like actually 85?
No, but
Okay.
like she's young, but she kind of acts like an 80, like she acts like an 85-year-old grandma who's just like, feels like she has earned the right to say whatever she wants to because she has gone through life. She's 85, and like nobody's going to tell her that what she said was like a little bit too blunt or inappropriate. Like definitely neurodivergent, undiagnosed. that she's just like a young child version of that, like a teenage,
That's
early
great.
20s-ish version
Oh,
of
that's
that,
so
which
fun.
almost makes it better.
That's so
Love
fun.
it.
It's
Oh my
great.
gosh. All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for us then. Ben, as always, before we go, why don't you tell everyone where we can be reached?
You bet. Speaking of Blue Sky, which I mean we did like a few minutes ago, but whatever. I'm going to segue this way. You can find us on Blue Sky. We are at DN Discussions. If you're looking for Ryan specifically, he is at TBK Zord. I am at Ben Bumhofer. If you don't want to reach out to Blue Sky, or if you haven't joined the bandwagon and hopped on yet, you can always email us as well. Tell us about some of your favorite things about the DMG, because we love obviously talking about it. We love hearing about it, as well as anything going on in your games. We'd love to hear what's going on, because everybody wants to gush about their D&D game. So gush away to us. You can do that through email. It's dndiscussions@gmail.com, or you can join our Discord. We're talking about stuff all the time there, and you can find a link to that on our website, dndiscussions.com. Aside from that, if you're like, hey, I want to hear these guys play D&D, they seem cool, well, you can listen to me playing. We're again still in the final throes of the last chapter of Rime of the Frost Maiden. A lot of stuff's going on. Oh boy, we lived. Spoilers. Anyways, so yeah, check that out on +5 to hit. I'm having a lot of fun there, and stuff's happening. So check that out. That being said, again, dndiscussions.com for every episode we've ever had. Links to our socials are there. All the links to everything we talked about in this episode will be there, and of course, the link to the Discord. So with that, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. It is a pleasure, Alyssa, as always. We want you back every week. We understand you can't do that, but we're definitely going to have to bring you on again sometime soon, because absolute blast. Ryan, thank you for doing the show with me. I have a lot of fun. And everybody else, until next time, roll high. And I say this every time, and I really mean it. Be good to each other.
Take care, and we'll see you soon.